will briefly talk about my own experiences. I would not necessarily be normative, but I have a few hints and tips on the last slide. But mainly, I would talk about my motivation, my experience, how I think in my research communication. So it started really. I think I'm pretty lucky because more than half of my teaching is executive teaching. So it's executive MBA. It's something called Master of Management programs at our business school. And I learn a lot from the teaching in itself, but I also learned a lot about the lack of basic knowledge among managers and probably HR managers in particular, and a lot of faulty assumptions about both employees and managers, rooted in simplistic economic-based theories like agency theory and so on. And with particular relevance to HR managers, I mean, most of them are more interested in what's new rather than what works. They're more interested in what kind of systems you're using rather than what these systems can provide in terms of increasing employees' motivation, retention, performance, OCB, and so on. So there is a huge gap, I feel, where we as researchers can contribute in our research communication to practitioners, even if they're sometimes unwillingly listening to what you are saying. So my starting point is that my messages are not what most practitioners want to hear, but it's what they need to learn rather than what they want, because they typically want the simplicity. They listen to consultants and things like that. And I think we have a role to play in balancing that kind of communication. So based on this, I wrote my first scholarly book on HRM in 2008, which is not a textbook. It's used as a textbook in Norway. And my main motivation was that existing textbooks, especially back then, was so normative and little research based. So I tried to use my experience with practicing managers and my passion for research to sort of try to combine that. And that book is now coming out in the fifth edition in a few months. So it's popular, and it's popular also among practitioners, which is a good thing. So my communication to practitioners is quite broad. It's books, it's podcasts, interviews with television, participating in debates on television, radio, and I also have a regular monthly column in the main business newspaper in Norway. And in terms of getting to communicate to the audience, you have to find channels where the audience is. And there is a study by Colbert et al. From 2005 looking at HR managers in particular from the US, and only 2% of them read academic journals. And my guess is that not much more are reading the so-called practitioners' journals such as HBR, MIT Sloan Management Review, and so on. So if the ambition is to reach the audience, you need to use the channels where you find the audience. So that's why I don't spend a lot of time trying. I actually have never written a piece for these practitioner journals, but then I rather choose book chapters together with international colleagues and so on. So content-wise, topics. So first of all, I need to be interested in the topic. It needs to be hot to me, but it also needs to either to actually be interesting for practitioners, or I can make it to be interesting. So here are three of my latest monthly columns in the business newspaper. So one is about presentism bonuses, which really didn't work according to a very nice field experiment conducted by economists. Those in the incentive group actually increased their sickness leave by 53% over a year. And we have high sick leave numbers in Norway, so this is something that is on the agenda all the time. Another article was about remote working condition, remote work and performance. And this is also a big issue after the pandemic, and a lot of companies are having their back to office policies, and then it's highly relevant for practitioners. And then again, for I think it's the fifth article in the same newspaper I have about these generational differences, which is pretty much bullshit. So I recently had one now about Generation Z. It's interesting that the same prejudice about Generation Z is pretty much the same as for the millennial generation. And it also, in order to be interesting to me, it needs to be a topic where practitioners typically have faulty beliefs and assumptions. So typically believing in these generational differences, believing in incentives in order for people to show up, or that enforcing people to come back to the office is an effective way of getting a productive work environment, which is of course wrong. And there needs to be solid empirical documentation and plausible explanations for the main findings. And of course, so the recent meta-analysis on remote work, where the association between the degree of remote work and performance is explained by perceived autonomy. So I don't mention self-determination theory or the job characteristic model, because practitioner doesn't care the name of the theory. So, but I still think it is important to provide an explanation for the findings if practitioners are going to learn anything. And I also, when I choose a topic, it needs to have a practical implications, solutions somehow, typically like do more of this, less of that. And I need to have a short paragraph on where to start to work in order to work more efficiently on these topics. So both Kim and Wolfgang talked about this, and my way, I don't know how conscious I have been about this, but this is more like in hindsight. But of course, I write in a simpler manner, but not simplistic language. So, and what does this mean? First of all, you have the opportunity to be more pointed, to sharply worded, and more provocative than I am when I write academic articles. But I think it is very important to be academically solid. So what does that mean? That means that I should be aware of the samples from the studies that I refer to. If I write about one or three experiments in an article, I need to discuss why I think this might be generalizable to practitioner population. I am pretty aware of research design causality issues. So when we write an article, we write, if we don't have an experiment, have experimental data, we say that there's a positive or negative association between X and Y. But I try to use language that is sort of more accessible, such as the more autonomy, the better performance, which is not a violation to the causality norm, but it's sort of more easily understood. So there's a recent article on ways that academics can take part in communicating to practitioners. And I, as Wolfgang, I would say that I'm more an impact-driven scholar rather than a pracademic, which is sort of more like 50-50. And of course, I do understand the needs of journalists, editors, and the audience. But if I'm going to have a profile, if I'm going to have impact, I need to be different from other experts like consultants, or I mean, with social media, everyone is an expert today. So I think the academic part is sort of where I'm positioning myself. So my contribution is that I know research and I know how to communicate research. It's not that I'm first and foremost a practitioner. And of course, I need to have necessary expertise about what I'm writing, but unfortunately, I don't have 12 A plus journal publication each year. So I have to use other people's research. But I mean, reading a meta-analysis, reading a narrative review, you can become, and with a lot of experience in doing research, being an editor in journals and so on, it doesn't take that much time to familiarize yourself with a relatively new topic. I have to say, for me, less is more. So I often say no to journalists, podcasters, and so on, especially when they want me to comment on surveys done by consultancy organizations that are psychometrically totally out of anything. So simple items. 2 out of 3 managers think this and that. And I say no to that kind of, because I don't want to legitimize sort of what sells out there. So I often say no, and I also say no because sometimes I mean, Norway is a small country and it's relatively easy to become famous in Norway because we're only 5.5 million people, and people can get tired of me if I have a say about anything. So I try to narrow my communication to things that I really want to communicate and where I really have a high level of expertise. So in short, I do engage in and I like and enjoy communicating with practitioners, but I'm also conscious about my academic integrity and how I'm perceived as an academic in the audience. So the final slide, I try to speed up here so we have time for the general discussion. So of course, this takes time, but it's a really great learning experience. And first of all, as I mentioned, I'm using this type of communication, particularly the monthly column in the business newspaper, in a way of developing expertise on new topics. Then I typically also make a slide or two for my teaching if I find a topic that is hot among practitioners and a topic that is interesting. So there is always a combination between my research, my teaching, and my communication with practitioners. Secondly, I think that writing for practitioners has made me a better communicator, not only in terms of the practitioner section, the implication for practice in academic journals, but also in writing academic journals in general. So shorter sentences, being more explicit, being more clear. So I think in general that having this dual type of writing is sort of good for both sides. So I think there is, at least for me, there is some kind of a synergy between writing purely academic and for practitioners. I'm a very socially conscious person and I'm a news junkie. I follow debates about what's going on in society, also outside of my research, and I become irritated and angry when I heard practitioners are talking bullshit on television debates or in newspaper. So I find it's better to write and talk than to stay irritated and frustrated over managers' lack of logical thinking and ignorance. So I use it as a self-therapy. So what is my motivation? And basically, this is what I want to do. I am spending time on this. Of course, I do learn, as I just said, but I do it mainly because I want to. It's not a felt obligation toward the practitioner community. It's not about making my employer happy, even though they're happy that I'm a active contributor to to research communication. It's not about rewards and it's not about status. I know some people worry about if I may lose my academic status if I'm participating too much in research communication toward practitioners. I think that that is the case only if you oversell and if you simplify too much and if you sort of lose your academic integrity in that journey. So I don't think it needs to be a problem. And finally, as we know, intrinsic motivation has instrumental consequences. So I have received research communication prizes at my business school that came with great research money that I can spend for research. And I'm almost too well paid to have invited talks for practitioners. And the reason I'm too well paid is that I don't want to get less paid than retired athletes that are talking about how they was motivated to bicycling or skiing or whatsoever, or other celebrities in Norway, because I have something to offer and I don't want to sell my offerings at a cheaper price than people that has less to contribute with.